And now our GreenGov 2016 program continues with a dynamic conversation on resilience. Would you please welcome Resilience Team Lead, the Office of Community Planning and Development in HUD, Kevin Bush. FEMA's Associate Administrator for Policy, Program Analysis, and International Affairs, David Bibo. The USDA's Deputy Undersecretary of Natural Resources and Environment, Leslie Jones. And CEQ's Associate Director for Climate Preparedness, Jainey Bavishi.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I know we're running a little late, but we appreciate you being here. For HUD, resilience is a matter of necessity. A couple quick stats on our end. Our annual budget's somewhere between $40 and $50 billion that fluctuates every year. But since 2005, Congress has appropriated over $45 billion additional to support long-term disaster recovery in communities. That's essentially an entire another year of funding just to focus on disaster recovery. In addition, the people we serve throughout the country are already often the most vulnerable, and we know that climate change and other disasters impact them even more. We have a tremendous amount of investment also across the country in the built environment, and it behooves us to make sure that those investments are built to last. But enough about federal investments. What I'm curious about, and Dave, I think we start with you, is how do we structure our programs, our investments, in ways that can incentivize private or even other public sector investment in resilience?
So it's a great question, and I think the way that we think about it at FEMA is trying to enable disaster risk reduction nationally and drawing more actors into risk reduction work. And as I talk about that in sort of in abstract terms, I don't want to miss what I think is an important opportunity, which is to highlight that we always have ongoing disasters going on around the country. But we have a particularly sizable incident in Louisiana right now where tens of thousands of our fellow Americans are really struggling after surviving a devastating flood. We've had more than 139,000 registrations for FEMA assistance, and we've already distributed close to $500 million in housing assistance alone. That's not even getting to the type of investments that we're mostly going to be talking about today, which is about, at least Kevin and I, about the built environment and infrastructure. And so I think whenever we talk about the impacts of disaster, we have to think about the people who are impacted by disaster, who are living in these communities that are now faced with an enormous challenge of recovery. And the reality, I think, is that there will never be enough federal investment or even federal and state investment to go around and really to make a sizable dent in the risk that the nation faces. So how do we draw more actors into the mix? How do we get people to make choices that reduce their own risk? And I think there are a lot of promising engagement with the public on the disaster deductible concept finished in this administration, but the FEMA administrator is very committed to framing up options for whomever the next FEMA administrator is and whomever the next presidential administration is, so that they're not starting from scratch with thinking about how we at the federal level can incentivize some infrastructure investment. And so I want to come back to you on that point. And you know, I mentioned the public assistance program. You know, you mentioned how much CDBG funding and HUD investment has been allocated over the past several years. The past 10 years, FEMA's allocated more than $33 billion in public assistance, and 2/3 of that goes for infrastructure investment. So as we listen to the both major party nominees saying that they are interested in infrastructure investment to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, both major party nominees, what is it that we would be thinking about suggesting to the next administration about some choices that they should make if they're find willingness between whatever administration comes in and Congress to do something on infrastructure? What should we be suggesting to them that they think about in terms of decisions that could improve resilience?
It's a great question, you know, and one that we've been thinking about a lot recently. You know, I mentioned the $45 billion, but one of our core annual programs, the Community Development Block Grant Annual Program, is around $4 billion annually, and at the state level, half of that's spent on infrastructure, and at the city level, 1/3 of it is spent on infrastructure. We also insure hospital mortgages around the country, so there's, you know, between the two of us, right, we've got quite a bit of investment in the built environment. And as the resources, continue to decline and the need continues to climb around the country, irrespective of climate change, but when you add in climate change, it gets even worse, right? We have to start asking, how do we structure these programs in a way that goes further, right? And one of the things that we've been toying around, and we actually put a fact sheet out on this recently. If you go to hud.gov/resilience, quick plug, you can find it. It's on high performance infrastructure. Is asking these questions of what is high performance infrastructure? Some people call it high road, whatever. And for us, it's taking in multiple sources of funding. So where ideally HUD funding isn't the 100% share, right? The era of completely free grant money is over, right? How do you take these in, layer them in with new and novel forms of finance like green bonds or even resilience bonds when we can figure out how to make that work, and pull in things like novel procurement strategies, right? So a lot of infrastructure in this country is done, a community will put out a design contract. They'll get their designs in, and then they'll do a build contract. They'll get their build in, right? But in other parts of the world, it's much more common, or at least increasingly common, to do full infrastructure lifecycle contracting, right? So you're doing design, build, operate, and maintain contracts. And when you do that, you align the life cycle, and then the incentive exists to make that infrastructure, design it more resiliently, to build it more resiliently, because you're going to be the one stuck with the operating and the maintaining of it as well. And also something near and dear to HUD, you can structure those procurements in a way where you get at other social outcomes. So you're wrapping in the co-benefits. So instead of saying, I want this piece of infrastructure built, and you already know the design, you say, I want these outcomes built. So that's the performance-based infrastructure piece, right? This is going on just down the street, actually, in Prince George's County, with an RFP they put out and was awarded to Corvius Solutions for their water infrastructure. Corvius is providing that water infrastructure, yes, but they're also providing green infrastructure. They're on the hook for workforce development programs as well. So it's not just this simple gray solution, right? And we're starting to offer technical assistance to our 1,232 grantees to say, if you want to use HUD money and you want to make it go further and layer it in with this, let us work with you and figure out how to do that. Even if that means working with the bond issuance, helping you get a green bond issuance out so we know that those funds are earmarked for something like that. But that's only, kind of one step to make more of these examples exist around the country.
So, Leslie, you've heard Kevin and I talk a lot about the built environment, but we heard your boss talk about the natural environment, especially as it pertained to wildfire. So can you say a little bit more about that resilience of the built environment, how you all are thinking about that?
Yeah, so first of all, I really appreciate being here and how resilient you all are in sticking to the end of the day. I understand that we're the last panel of 46 speakers, so you've taken in a lot. So I appreciate you all being here and hearing us on this. So Secretary Vilsack, hopefully many of you heard his remarks. There's an advantage to having your boss go before you. He covers a lot of the issues, and most importantly, hopefully you saved all your difficult questions for him and not necessarily for me. But I do want to spend a little time talking about trees, talking about our natural infrastructure. So the U.S. Forest Service has about 193 million acres of your national forests, and then we help support the management of hundreds of millions of acres of state, private, and tribal forests across the country. So that's a chunk of real estate, and it's a lot of opportunity to build on sustainable practices, but it's also a lot of potential challenges out there. You all know trees, I hope. I hope you all have trees where you are. And I think as a general rule, they are incredibly resilient given all that we throw at them. I mean, look at the trees here right in urban DC, tens of thousands of trees that we abuse them quite a bit. And nonetheless, they really provide a lot of benefits to us. Many of you are probably familiar with those benefits sort of generally, but I want to just kind of tick through a couple of the numbers of the benefits that they provide because it's really quite impressive. So our U.S. forests sequester about 12% of our carbon. That's going to be really important to maintain in order for us to achieve the President's Climate Action Plan, the building blocks that Secretary Vilsack mentioned earlier. We want to keep that number and hopefully grow that number. Secretary Vilsack also talked a bit about water. Our forests provide 60% of our surface drinking water. So the link between forests and faucets and water faucets is really very direct. And then those urban trees that I talked about that work so hard, our urban forests, nearly 2.5 trillion in structural benefits come from our urban forests, with about 17 billion annual benefits in terms of stormwater mitigation, cooling, energy efficiency. So they're working hard for us. But there are some tipping points, and this is one of the challenges. We have climate change. We have severe and sustained drought in the West. We have insect and disease. We have wildfire. Those are all really putting some unusual stresses in our forests. California alone, 60 million dead trees, with several tens of millions more that are dying and that are going to add to that. That's an incredible challenge for the state of California and for all of us, and is really going to fundamentally change the landscape out there. So what this means is that restoration, increasing the pace and scale of restoration of our forests, is a really high priority for us. And we are aggressively pursuing that. About 2.5 million acres every year we restore, but we have over 50 million acres that are in high need of restoration. So you can see that there's a lot to do there. We know how to do this. We have an all lands approach, so we're working with a variety of partners to do this, and we're doing all we can. But one of the things we're trying to do here in this symposium is to surface some of those challenges. So, we have to talk a little bit about one of the challenges that the Forest Service has to increasing the resilience of our forests, maintaining and increasing the resilience of our forests, is our wildfires and the cost that the Forest Service has to fight those wildfires. Secretary alluded to this, and I'm not going to go into all the budget minutia, but for those of you who work with numbers, I'll just say in 2015, last year, wildfire season, over 60% of the Forest Service budget was allocated to fighting fires. So that means there's less money to do the work that we need to do to restore those fires. So that's absolutely a problem that we need to get our arms around.
What about the costs that are associated with the, there's a lot of land to manage, right? So what about we've heard a lot about greening your fleet and things like that. Is the Forest Service taking steps to be able to do those?
We are, and maybe I'll use an example, since I was just talking about fire. Maybe I'll use an example of what we're doing to green our fire operations. So part of the Forest Service Net Zero campaign is an initiative called Green Fire, which I have to say is a really cool name. And this is an effort to look at the kind of mini cities, the fire camps that sprout up around fire situations. We have food, we have fuel, we have temporary housing, we have communications. In 2015, at the height of the fire season, we had 30,000 boots on the ground. So you can imagine that these really are little mini cities. And there's a lot to do there to green those operations and make them sustainable. Some of it, I think, is going to be very familiar and intuitive to you. I was surprised at some of it, and an example of that is around food waste. So firefighters are out on the line, they are working hard, and they need a really high-calorie, intensive diet to sustain themselves as they're out there on the fire line. And I've seen some of these, and there's a lot of calories. Michael Phelps types of calories going on here. And because of our procurement policies, we provide the same food to everyone that's in fire camp, whether you are a firefighter out on the line or whether you're a dispatcher or somebody who, doesn't need all of those calories. So as a result, a lot of food gets discarded. So we need to change those policies that are a barrier to that. Another example, and this may be an example where kind of old traditional practices may turn out to be the solution going forward. And this is around water bottles. Before everyone had disposable water bottles, you filled up your canteen at a water refilling station. So we're working real hard to encourage or re-encourage that practice in our fire camps. And there's other examples around mobile solar platforms, around rechargeable batteries, but obviously Forest Service is not the only agency that deals with emergency response. So there's Interior, FEMA, HUD, we all have an opportunity here to do some shared learning around the infrastructure or the operations of emergency response. So Jainey, unlike all of us who are representing individual agencies, and we've heard from many today, you are in the unique position of being able to look across the federal family at CEQ. And many of the folks that were here today sharing our stories, we are examples of kind of being leaders in the sustainable movement. What are you thinking about at CEQ to help the suite of agencies across the federal family have the opportunity to be in a role of being a leader?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. And that's a really important question. I mean, the agencies we have represented here today, like USDA and other natural resource agencies, often have an inherent capability within their agency around climate science. It's part of their mission. Not all agencies have that. And all three of the agencies here today, HUD, FEMA, and USDA, have a role in disaster response, which has just catapulted them into thinking about climate impacts as disasters become more frequent and intense. Again, not all agencies play that role, but it's really important for all agencies to be thinking about how climate change impacts their missions, programs, and operations. So Executive Order 13653, which is entitled Preparing the United States for the Impacts of Climate Change, required every agency to develop an agency adaptation plan. And that was a really important first step in just getting agencies to think about how climate change is impacting their agency's mission, programs, their facilities, all across the board. But we're finding that in order to be really strategic about it, it takes more than each agency developing an agency adaptation plan. We really need to coordinate across agencies, and also, in many instances, coordinate with our state and local partners and partners in the private sector. So this summer, actually, OMB and CEQ reinvigorated this process by asking every agency to do a self-assessment through a survey tool that we developed and come in for a meeting with OMB and CEQ to look at their agency adaptation plans, help to start prioritizing and sequencing the actions in their plans, but then also identify opportunities for shared resources and shared learning across the agencies. And we think this is an important first step to really closing that gap. But this will definitely take some continued effort, and we'll continue to use interagency spaces like the Council on Climate Preparedness and Resilience to really leverage some shared learning across the federal government.
So we have in our audience today a lot of the folks who are going to be the problem solvers as we go forward. So as you're looking at specific obstacles and barriers to really institutionalizing all this good work, what would you like to share with the folks here that they should be kind of honed in on?
Sure, thank you. As we talked to agencies this summer, I think one of the things that came up over and over and over again was the need for a governance structure within the agency to really incorporate resilience across all of the programs in the agencies. This requires coordination between the program and policy people as well as the operations and facilities people. Often those people don't talk to each other. So we need cross-agency coordination structures. And some agencies are doing this through formal and informal task forces or working groups across their agencies. Other agencies have issued policy directives or memos, guidance of some sort within their agency to really specify which part of the agency is playing which role. And other agencies are still working through this, but I think governance is really an incredibly important first step in figuring this out. The second is around training. We've made it a priority in this administration to link the next generation American workforce to climate science and tools so that they're ready to respond, I should say, to the urgent impacts of climate change and really help to develop cutting edge solutions. We need the same thing for our federal workforce. And nearly all agencies are doing some kind of climate training, whether it's broad training or job specific training. EPA is a really good example of this. They've trained nearly 6,000 employees, which is about 40% of their workforce, and they're pursuing mandatory climate training for all of their new employees. I think this kind of model is something that we should all strive for, but clearly there are resource constraints and other constraints that we need to overcome in order to get there. And then the third thing I would say is access to data and tools. We've got a lot of data and tools out there, but figuring out which is the right data set or which is the right tool to address the specific problem you're trying to solve is often complicated. And so I think we're increasingly trying to figure out how do we help to translate or navigate the various data and tools that are out there to address agency-specific problems. And we've got some areas where we still need some new data development. I think the international agencies that we work with, State Department, USAID in particular, are still in search of data and tools in the international space that are either specific or enough or granular enough to help really inform their decisions. So there's still some barriers that we need to overcome. I would say though that this is not unlike, these problems that I just mentioned are not unlike the barriers that state and local leaders are also trying to overcome as they think about developing and implementing resilience plans in their own jurisdictions. So I think it really speaks to the need to continue to coordinate across different levels of government and different organizational boundaries to make sure that we're just all learning together as we develop these plans and think about how to build more resilience in our own infrastructure.
Great. Well, I don't know if we're taking questions from the audience or giving ourselves opportunity for last remarks.
I'm happy to take questions if we have time.
Last remarks.
Sorry.
The voice.
Yeah.
I may actually just kind of parrot my secretary a little bit here and just give a round of applause to all of you and thank you for your service. You really are the problem solvers here, and I am very encouraged by the opportunities and the hard work. Whatever the next 4 years bring, really eager to see how this good work can continue, and just want to thank you all for your continued creativity and commitment to these issues.
So I'll pick up on the opportunity theme, and I think that's what you heard a lot of us talking about, not just on this panel, but throughout the day, is just how much opportunity there really is. I think we can, there are things that lots of reasonable people can agree on, especially when you're trying to avoid loss of life and trying to avoid human suffering. And I think that is what a lot of what you're hearing from us up here today, especially with respect to disasters, is about, and always reminding people about the humans who are on the other end of the word resilience and what it actually means. Is extraordinarily helpful. And I think it's also helpful and important for all of us to be cognizant of the fact that people hear resilience in different ways. The word resilience probably means something relatively similar to the four of us and to probably 90% of the people sitting in the audience. But a lot of the people that we serve view resilience as, I've been affected by something, I am resilient and I am going to build back, and I'm going to build back right here. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the outcome that is was always best. And so we have to think about the way that we talk with the people we're trying to engage with and trying to serve and support in communities across the country. And that's the thought I would leave folks with.
I'm glad you brought up that last point, Dave, because I thought for a second this was going to be the first panel on resilience not to opine on the definition of resilience.
Sorry. You're welcome.
No, it's good. It's good. And I think it's really important for us, too, because, my office is really the office of buzzwords, if I'm honest. And so we've been, we were working on sustainability, too. We were the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities at one point. And to us, resilience is really, if you look at the folks that we work with, right, primarily on the city's side and counties and whatnot, resilience is basically like the baseline immunity of a city, right? I don't care what, to use Rockefeller's terms, what shock or stress it is that the city has to face, whether that's a hurricane, a wildfire, or a plant closure, or the discovery of a bunch of lead in drinking water pipes, right? How strong is that city's immune system? How strong are its infrastructure sectors, its social sectors, its civic institutions, et cetera? Because if we can strengthen those things, then you're making a community that thrives in the steady state, but also bounces back when it hits a disaster. And so that's what really resilience is about to us, is just building good places.
That's great, and I think what I will add to that is what it requires is a real cultural paradigm shift, and I think, building on what Leslie said, thank you to all of you for being here and for all the work that you're doing, because you're really a part of that cultural shift within the agencies, and it's so critically important, whether you're an operations manager or facilities manager, you're running a program, it's going to require an all-of-government cultural shift to make that happen. So thank you, and thanks to all the panelists. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks.